Good morning and welcome to Worldwide Wisdom. I've just returned from the Holy Land where there's a very, very interesting gate in the wall of Jerusalem. You know, Jerusalem's got some very famous gates. There's the gate of Jaffa Gate, which is perhaps the most famous gate these days because it's the safest gate with which to access into Jerusalem. Our residence was right outside of the Jaffa Gate, a very beautiful location. And this gate is the gate from which you go from Jerusalem all the way to Jaffa. It goes all the way to the Mediterranean, right? That's the Jaffa Gate. There's another gate called the Gate of Shechem, Shar Shechem, which is the gate of, it's poorly translated as the Gate of Damascus. Now, Shechem is not Damascus. Shechem is Shechem, is what they call Nablus. But really, it's in Judea and Samaria. It's called the gate of, the gate which goes to Judea and Samaria. That's where Joseph is buried. But for some reason, they translate it as Damascus Gate, which is a different name. It's not really the right name. That one is a little bit dangerous these days to go. It's the Arab Quarter. But it's another gate. Another gate that we saw in Jerusalem this week was the gate of Shar Arayot, the gate of the lions. That's where the paratroopers entered Jerusalem in the 6-day war. It's right across from the Mount of Olives, the oldest cemetery in the world that's still in continuous use, where our grandparents are buried. We went to visit them. That's the Shar Arayot, the gates of lions. There's another gate called the Dung Gate, Shar Ashpot, which is the gate that's closest to the western wall. Why is that called the gate of the dung? Is because during a certain period in history, they tried to erase the presence of the Kotel of the western wall by covering it in garbage. They tried to turn it into a garbage site. And that's why it's called the Dung Gate. But there is another gate that I'd like to bring to your attention. It's called Shar HaRachamim. Well, Shar Tzion is not really a gate. There's Har Tzion, which is the Mount of Zion, which is part of, it's like kind of connected to the old city. That's where King David is buried. We never made it there on this trip. It was too short. But it's Har Tzion. Maybe it's called Shar Tzion. I guess it probably is called Shar Tzion, the Gate of Zion, to get into the tomb of David. Yeah, it probably is. There's actually, when you go to the Gate of Zion, you actually see bullet holes all over that entrance because there was a big battle that took place at that gate in the 6-day war. And you see literally, artillery shells in the wall still today. But the gate I'd like to share with you today is the gate of Shar HaRachamim, the gates of mercy, also known as the Golden Gate. This gate is not that famous because it's been blocked up for hundreds of years. The Golden Gate. It's been sealed for centuries. The Shar HaRachamim, the gates of mercy, why has it been blocked up? Because this one is directly behind the Temple Mount. Directly behind the Temple Mount. That's how you go from the Mount of Olives onto the Temple Mount. Now, the Medrash tells us something very, very interesting, that the day will come in the future when the king of Persia, Iran, will rise up and attack the king of Arabia. Sounds like Saudi Arabia. And a great war will ensue, and the king of Aram will get involved. We're not sure who Aram is. Maybe it means the West. And what would happen is that the Jews will be caught between a rock and a hard place. The nations, the whole world will be trembling that the king of Persia is trying to destroy the whole world. Does that sound familiar? That the king of Iran is trying to destroy the whole world? The whole world will be trembling, and the Jewish people will be stuck between a rock and a hard place. They won't be able to differentiate between friend and foe. They won't be able to know who's their friend and who's their enemy. And they'll have no choice but to turn to their Father in heaven. Nothing. They have no choice but to turn to their Father in heaven. Can you imagine the Jews? And at that point, when they turn to their Father in heaven, it's then that the Messiah, Mashiach, will rise on the Mount of Olives. He will stand on the Mount of Olives, which is directly across from the Temple Mount, and he will declare, Anovim, Anovim, Higia Zman Geulaschem, humble ones, the time of your redemption has arrived. Kol ma she'asisi li asisi el bishvilchem, everything that I've done only for your sake. And then the Mashiach will arrive, and where's he going to go into the Temple Mount from? The gate of mercy, the one that is now blocked up. So why is it blocked up? Because the Arabs blocked it up because of this Medrash. They figured that the Mashiach is going to come and save the Jewish people, save humanity, really. And they didn't want that to happen. So what do? They figured they break it up. And with that, they'd be protected from redemption. The problem is that it dawned upon them that Mashiach might have tools. At some point afterwards, they realized the Mashiach might have a hammer or a chisel. He might know people in the Home Depot industry. He might have connections. So they figured they're going to come up with another ingenious solution. What they decided to do is that they knew that the Jewish people have a problem, or have a problem called tumah v'tara, purity and impurity, which means when they come in contact with a dead person, they become impure. So they figured even if Messiah has friends at Home Depot, what they're going to do is they're going to build a cemetery right in front of the gates of mercy. And that way, when the Messiah makes his way to the gates of mercy, he's going to go through the cemetery, become impure, and that's the wrap. He won't be able to be the Messiah anymore. Now, it's a technical detail because impurity only lasts like 7 days. Fine, but maybe they'll get 7 days to figure things out. So that's why they were okay with that. And that's why when you drive around the old city, we drove on Sunday. We drove from the gate of Yafa to the gate of Shechem, the Arab quarter. We went around the old city the other way in the East Jerusalem. We went around past the gate of the Lions, the paratroopers gate, and then we went right past this gate of the of Mercy. And you see this very awkwardly placed Arab cemetery between the road and the gate that's blocked up. It's like a very strange place to put a cemetery, like literally on the side of the road. But I explained to my kids that what the reason it's there for is because it's there to block the Messiah. The problem is that there was one technical detail that they overlooked. And the technical detail that the Arabs overlooked with this cemetery right down the side of the road is that non-Jewish corpses do not make you impure. Which kind of corpses makes a person impure? Only Jewish corpses, only dead Jewish people makes one impure. But like a Kohen, for example. A Kohen doesn't go into a Jewish cemetery. But is there a problem for a Kohen to go into a non-Jewish cemetery? The answer is no. Because the non-Jews don't make you impure. It's only a Jewish corpse that makes a person impure. And therefore, we have no problem. As long as Mashiach's got a friend in Home Depot, he's going to be okay to be able to come through that gate, and he'll be able to bring the world to redemption. May it happen speedily in our days. Now, how is this connected to today's Torah portion? Because in today's Torah portion, we come across a very interesting law with regards to purity and impurity inside of the Holy Temple. What is the most important part of the Holy Temple? The Kodesh HaKadoshim, the Holy of Holies. What are the other most iconic parts of the temple that you come to mind? The Ark is inside of the Holy of Holies. What else can you think of? The altar. Now, how many altars were there? 2 altars. What's the difference between the 2 altars? One was the altar of incense. That was the golden altar. And the other one was the of the animal offerings. Is that what you said? The animal offerings, that was called the copper altar. The copper altar was like 2 stories high. It was massive. It was a massive altar. The copper altar for animals. There was a fire burning there all the time. That's why we have a Ner Tamid, an eternal light in a shul everywhere, because there was constantly a fire burning over there. We'll learn about that soon in the Torah. And this is the copper altar, which was outside in the main courtyard of the priests. Now, inside of the holy, right in front of the Holy of Holies, was the little tiny altar, maybe the size of this little table here, and it was even smaller than this, and it was called the golden altar. The golden altar is very similar to the bris we're about to perform, because the person, the Kohen, who was chosen to offer the incense on the golden altar each day was known that he was going to become rich. Whichever Kohen was the one that was going to offer the incense upon the golden altar was a blessing for wealth, and the Kohanim would vie for this honor. They would do it once in a lifetime, and it's very similar to a sandik. We're about to have a bris here in our shul, where the sandik, Rabbi Lou, the father-in-law, the grandfather, is going to be the sandik, and it's considered like a Kohen who's offering the incense when he holds the baby for the bris, and the baby goes into covenant with God Almighty. Holding the baby for a bris as a sandik is also a blessing for wealth, and you're supposed to only do it one time per family, right? That's how you're supposed to do the sandik. It's very similar to the golden altar. Now, the golden altar is the subject of this week's Torah portion. It's the final part of the temple furniture that's mentioned in the sequence of the furnitures. And last week in Parshas Truma, we learned about the copper altar. So the golden altar is this week, and the copper altar is last week. The Mishnah tells us something very, very interesting. The Mishnah tells us that when it comes to the Mishnah tells us, here it is, that when it comes to purity and impurity, both of these altars do not become impure. That's what it says. Both of the altars do not become impure. What does that mean? For example, the Greeks invade the Holy Temple and they decide to I don't know, kill someone on the altar, or they bring a rodent or some impure item onto the altar, then the altar itself does not become impure. It's very interesting, right? The altar itself doesn't become impure. Now, what's the reason for this? There's a debate in the Talmud, in the Mishnah, about the reason why the altar does not become impure. It sounds benign, but it's actually very deeply personal to us. It's quite inspirational. The reason is, Rabbi Eliezer says the reason is because the altar is like, it's filled with earth. And therefore, it's just like earth doesn't become impure, so too the altar does not become impure. A second reason is given by the sages. They argue with Rabbi Eliezer, and they say the reason why the altar doesn't become impure is because the altar is only a coating. It's gold. It's like gold plated. It's an external. It's a plating. It's not, the gold is not the actual altar. It's external to the altar. The copper is not the altar. It's external to the altar, and therefore, since it's superficial, when you touch the superficial, the outside, it doesn't make the whole thing impure. So this is a debate as to why the altars don't become impure. First reason, Rabbi Eliezer, is because it's earth, and earth does not become impure. That's the essence of the altar. And the second reason is that the gold and the copper is only superficial. It's external, and therefore it's not, just because that touched impurity, it doesn't make the whole thing impure. Now, what does this debate got to do with our lives, and how is this interesting? How is this meaningful? How is this personal? The Rebbe explains to us that the altar, remember we learned in last week's Torah portion, and they shall make for me a temple. They shall make for me a temple, and I shall dwell amongst them. It doesn't say they should make for me a temple, and I shall dwell in it. It says they should make for me a temple, and I shall dwell in them. Which means that the purpose of the temple that we built is for God to dwell within us. Essentially, what that means is that each and every single one of us is a temple for God. And therefore, we each have an altar inside of ourselves. We each have a piece of us which is represented by the altar. Now, what is the altar? What is the altar? The altar is a place of sacrifice, right? It's a place where you slaughter things. There's a part of our humanity, there's a part of our soul, of our Jewish experience, of our spiritual experience, where we are a martyr, where we give up things for a higher cause. If you got out of bed today and you came to shul, or if you spent some of your hard-earned money on a mitzvah or on tzedakah, let's say you took some money and you could have used it on a self-indulgent vacation, and you decided instead to use that money for helping the poor, maybe donating to your shul, right? Then what you've done is that you've actually sacrificed a piece of yourself for a higher cause, for some conviction that you believe in. That altar, therefore, represents the core of our Jewishness. That's what that is. The altar represents the pinta layid, the essence of our Jewish identity. And the question now arises is, can a Jew become impure? That's the question that arises. Can a Jew who's living a bit of a conflicted life, on the one hand he comes to shul in the morning and he lays tefillin and he learns some Torah and he's giving some tzedakah, but later on in the day he might be doing things that he's not supposed to be doing. So which is his real truth? Which is his truth? A part of me is like the altar. A part of me is sacrificing for God. But then a part of me became impure, it touched a dead body. So who am I? The Beinoni? So the Beinoni of Tanya is the Jew that struggles. You're on the battlefield. Okay, that's nice. I like that. So you're on the battlefield. Don't ever define yourself by your mistakes, right? We never should define ourselves by our lowest moments. But I can tell you that when somebody's on a spiritual journey and he fails and he stumbles, it's like riding a bike. Growing in your spirituality is like learning to ride a bike. It's not a question of if you're going to fall off. The question is when you're going to fall off. And the question when you're going to fall off is how you're going to react. Because when you're on that spiritual journey and you mess up, how about if you're on an emotional journey? Maybe you're trying to improve your relationship with your wife, with your husband. Maybe you're trying to become a more conscious spouse. And what happens? You mess up. It happens. You've heard of such a thing, right? Could be that somebody messes up in their relationship with their spouse. Then what happens? Do they get crestfallen and crushed because they failed, or do they find strength in the good times? You don't really get credit for the good times. You only get called out for the bad times. It's called the broken tile syndrome, right? If you look at a ceiling and there's 100 tiles in the ceiling and one of them is cracked, then you ask somebody, what do you see? What are they going to tell you? Everybody only sees, why is that tile cracked? Hello, there's 99 good tiles here, right? You ask someone to look at a picture. You take a picture, you put a black dot on a white page. You ask them, what do you see? What they're all going to tell you, 100% of the people are going to tell you, I see a black dot. No one's going to tell you, I see a white page. They're going to tell you, I see a black dot, because they see the problem. So it's very, very easy for us to identify with our shortcomings instead of with our achievements. It's very, very easy for us to identify with the moment of selfishness with our spouse or the moment of unconsciousness with our spouse than it is to identify with the 99% of the time that you were actually a good, selfless, kind, altruistic, thoughtful, right? Same thing with parenting. You can much easier identify with being the nasty, unconscious, unpleasant parent with wounded attachments more than it is to be the parent that was patient and kind and thoughtful the rest of the time. Comes the Mishnah today and tells us something amazing. The Mishnah tells us today that the altar does not become impure. The altar does not become impure. You're a Jew. You have a point of sacrifice within you. You've got a point within yourself that connects, that is willing to sacrifice for God. Even if later on you encountered a mistake, you fell, you stumbled, you battled, you broke, you fell, that does not define you. Your altar does not become impure. Why not? Two reasons. There's two reasons. The first reason is because the altar is made out of earth. The altar is made out of earth. What does that mean? The Rebbe explains that earth is humility. Earth is what everybody walks on. When you have humility, humility is the antithesis of all evil. If you remember, Tanya chapter 6 teaches us that what is the poster child of evil? Anybody remember Tanya chapter 6? We gotta know this, guys. We gotta own Tanya. We gotta own it. Tanya chapter 6 tells us the poster child of evil is ego. Ego. Well, an ego in English actually is an acronym for edging God out. Ego, edging God out. When there is ego, there is no God. Where there is God, there is no ego. They cannot coexist. The Medrash tells us explicitly, he and I cannot coexist. Where there's God, there cannot be ego. But where there is ego, God says, I can't be present. I can't be there. So this being said, good morning to our online viewers here from all over. Jonathan from down south, good to see you. And for all these other people, Lucy, great to have you with us. Lucy and Jens and Myers and Zion and beautiful. Okay, so back to here. So what does it mean that when you're able to have the humility to say, God, I messed up, just that moment of saying, I made a mistake, that alone is enough to purify you. Because that is the definition of teshuvah. Teshuvah, repentance or return, means that you regret what you did. You say, I made a mistake. I'm sorry. I didn't mean it. It was a moment of thoughtlessness. I lost control of myself. And if you can just own up to that, you're being like the earth, earth doesn't become impure. Earth is the antithesis of impurity. Earth is humility, which is the lightning rod for God's presence. Then comes a second explanation by the sages. And now the sages perhaps were a little more practical. Maybe they were a little more practical than Rabbi Eliezer. Because the sages give a different reason why the altar doesn't become impure. They say like this. So you know why the altar doesn't become impure? Because it's superficial. It's not who you really are. Think about that. When you do something right, that's expressive of your truth. When you do something wrong, that's expressive of your insanity. It's interesting, right? Because if you think about who you really are and what defines you, you can realize that at our core, we're a godly soul. We're a piece of God. And any sin that we make is our godly soul in a state of coma, is a hijacking of our awareness, and therefore it's not our truth. And with that approach, the sages explain that the sin that you made is not expressive of your truth, of who you really are. It's superficial. The gold and the copper represents two kinds of Jews. There's the rich Jew, which is represented by the gold, and there's the poor Jew that's got only copper coins. No matter where your financial standing is, or as it represents your spiritual standing, whether you're a very golden Jew or just a copper Jew. Whether you're a gold or a copper, those differences are only superficial. Because at your deepest truth, you're just a piece of God. And therefore, you cannot violate your deepest essence. It's who you are, and you cannot defy it. Just like if a Jew wants to convert to another religion, what happens? What happens if a Jew wants to convert to another religion? Nothing. Absolutely nothing happened. If a Jew decides to convert to, I don't know, to Buddhism or to Christianity or to Islam, nothing happened. He's still a Jew. Why is he still a Jew? Because this is your truth. You cannot convert out of your truth. You know, it's very interesting. I have a friend in the community. He's married to one of our members, and he tells me that he's a lapsed Catholic. You know what that is? Have you ever been a lapsed Catholic? I'm like, what does that mean? Does that mean you didn't pay your membership dues to the Catholic Church? Like, what does it mean you lapsed? Your credit card didn't go through? Like, what? He says he's lapsed because he's no longer practicing. That's what he meant. And I said to him, I've never heard of such a concept, and I cannot even relate to it. Because there is no such thing as a lapsed Jew. And by the way, Islam is the same thing. In Islam, if you don't, you agree or disagree? Oh, that is a thing. It's a real thing, yeah. But in Islam as well, there's a lapsed Islam, I think. They call it that. But that a person that doesn't say or do the practices of the Muslims is not considered a Muslim anymore. And the moment that he does begin those practices, then he is a Muslim. In other words, it's something which is behavioral. Religion for those other religions is behavioral. But for Judaism, for Jews, religion is not behavioral. It's essential. And that's what the mission is teaching us. The mission is teaching us that your altar can never become impure. Because who you are can never be violated, can never be changed. Just because you're having a bad day. Or because you met someone who happened to be giving a good speech or maybe a bad speech. It doesn't matter. You can't change your truths even though you sinned. That is not able to define you. The lesson we learn from here. Okay, Jonathan's asking an interesting question. What about a convert to Judaism who then no longer keeps Shabbos? What is the law of a convert to Judaism who no longer keeps Shabbos? The law is that if a convert converts to Judaism properly, if they accept all 613 commandments and they do the bris, and they're also supposed to bring an offering in the temple, which they obviously cannot do today, then they're a Jew for all intents and purposes. And if they stop keeping Shabbos later, then they're still a Jew. There are some courts that would actually retroactively discredit the conversion. There are some courts that would do that. But from what I understand, as general practice, they don't really do that. But generally speaking, once you become a Jew, that's it. You can never. The question is, Jonathan, if you ever became a Jew in the first place. That's the question that you're asking. But assuming that the person was sincere in their conversion, then they are fully a Jew. And the bottom line is how we finish this up here today, is that when it comes to purity and impurity in the temple, it's expressive of purity and impurity within our own identity. The question of the Mishnah is not a question that's disjointed or far removed from our lives. It's actually deeply expressive of our lives. Because the question is, what kind of Jew are you? As you picture the scene of yourself standing before God, noch 120. Just want you to picture that scene. After 120 years old, you get up there to heaven, and what's that conversation going to look like when God looks at you and he says, I've been waiting for you. What's he going to say? Zevi, what's he going to say? Is God going to say, you're an epic disappointment? Or is God potentially going to say, I'm so proud of you? This is the question that the Mishnah is addressing. The Mishnah is telling us, two answers. The first answer is perhaps less deep. The first answer is, you might have messed up, but if you have the humility to become like earth, then you're fine. The moment that you have the humility to become like earth and you say, God, I am sorry, I made a mistake, or you say wife or husband or daughter or child, you say, I'm sorry, I was stupid, I made a mistake. The moment you have that humility, you can turn it around. But the deeper answer is that your essence is untouchable. The deeper answer is that essentially you're a Jew, you're a child of God. And imagine what would happen if it was your dad that was standing there before you. Your dad believes in you, hopefully more than you believe in you. Especially when it comes to a healthy attachment like God Almighty. Maybe some dads are unhealthy. But when it comes to God, God is certainly a healthy father. And therefore, when he sees us, he says, my kindle, my son, my daughter, I'm so proud of you. Hashem believes in you. You cannot become impure. We cannot become impure. And the question I want to leave you with is, if God believes in you, that's wonderful. The question is, do you believe in you? Any questions, folks? How are we doing? Yes, Ed.
There was a guy I met in Navy. He came to America, his family came to America during the Spanish Inquisition.
Okay.
He was a Jew.
Question or a story?
Nope, it was a question.
Question. Okay, you're on camera. Yeah?
But I'm giving you some background so you understand what's going on.
Yeah?
He came during the Spanish Inquisition.
Oh, somebody came through from the Spanish Inquisition to America, okay?
Right.
And you knew the descendants,
Yes.
okay?
Now, as he told me when he saved my life, I'm a Jew
Okay?
from ancestry.
He identified as a Jew through the Spanish Inquisition. Okay?
Then I took a DNA test of somebody from Cuba who was in Newark, basically told me the same thing. Does he still count as a Jew?
Okay, so you have a Jew that lives as a Catholic, but his ancestry can trace his mother's ancestry all the way back to Jewish people 500, 600, 700 years ago. Look, that's a question that the Messiah himself is going to determine. It says that Mashiach meirach v'doin, he will smell and judge. He will smell and ascertain. He's going to do, you ever heard of the smell test? That's what it comes with Mashiach. It's the smell test. He's going to smell and he's going to be able to identify who's a Jew and who's not a Jew. This is not for us to determine. It's for God. It's for Mashiach himself to determine. The bottom line is the message is clear, folks. I'm going to wrap it up over here. We have a bris to do chop chop. So let's go straight into that and wish everybody a wonderful day. Shalom and be well.